Generally speaking, there are two different negotiation strategies. There are competitive strategies, strategies and tactics intended to undermine the other side's confidence in their bargaining position and strengthen their perception of your position. It is highly focused on leverage, a very competitive negotiation context. Examples of competitive strategies. In these competitive strategies, these examples track the 5 golden rules. So for instance, you're in a highly competitive strategic context. You want to use highly reluctant information sharing. You want to directly challenge oftentimes the other side's arguments or positions. You're holding your cards very, very close to your vest. Relatively open conflict on leverage issues. You also minimally rely on independent standards and procedures. You're going to talk about them, you're going to use them, but you're going to use them more to try to gain an advantage and to suggest that your leverage is greater than to truly actually rely on them. You have extreme initial offers and demands. You have highly reluctant moves. You also have overt and relatively biased agenda and agenda control tactics. Okay, so competitive strategies, you hold your cards very close to your vest. You really hammer home on leverage. You use standards, but more to try to gain an advantage in a different context. You start at 1, they start at 10. Highly aggressive offer concession moves, and agenda control tends to be a highly tactical back and forth process. Not our situation where you want me to control the agenda. You're negotiating almost always about the agenda when you use competitive strategies. Now, contrast that with problem-solving strategies. Strategies focused on building trust, relationships, and relatively open communications that enable parties to work together to solve problems. A very different type of strategies, very different application of the 5 golden rules. Examples of problem-solving strategies. Actions and atmosphere confirm trust and a valued relationship. Instead of holding your cards very, very close to your vest, you're going to share information more freely, more openly. There's going to be more trust involved. Leverage is downplayed, but it's still there. Leverage is downplayed, but it's still there. You're not openly talking about your alternative. You're not openly talking about your level of need, but there is an underlying assumption on both parts that in fact there is an alternative that may or may not exist, and you may need or not need the deal to a significant degree. A negotiation, an intra-family negotiation, may be one example where you share information with your brother or sister. Well, let's take an example, real-life example, piece of property, northern Wisconsin, family property, parents have died and has left the property to all 5 children. The 5 children need to make a determination as to who's going to pay the taxes, as to whether or not any of them want an ownership share. Maybe one of them is going to buy the other. They're going to relatively freely share information about comps, about their interest, assuming that you don't have some very significant sibling rivalries that exist. Leverage is downplayed. You're not going to talk about the fact that you could go to court, that you may have certain issues involved, but it's still there. You know that that is a possibility. An overt reliance on objective criteria in that context, maybe the 5 siblings decide to, together hire several appraisers or try to come up with some independent process that they all agree will result in a fair, objective evaluation of the property and a fair, objective split of the property for those that don't want to remain or those who do not want to continue to have an ownership interest in the property. Reasonable offers, more principled concessions, and mutually agreeable agenda and agenda control tactics. So competitive is one end of the spectrum. Hold your cards very close to the vest. Focus on leverage. Use standards to your advantage. Very aggressive offer concession strategies, and you negotiate and overtly try to control the agenda. And on the other end of the spectrum, problem-solving strategies. You share information more liberally, more openly. The actions and atmosphere are more problem-solving, more collaborative. Leverage is still there, but it's downplayed. You actually rely on those standards, oftentimes to definitively determine the result. a more reasonable offer concession strategy and mutually agreeable agenda and agenda control tactics.